The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod. We're coming to you live from our studios in Woodland Hills, less than a week away from the start of the Autism Podcast-a-thon. A week from now, I'm going to be sitting in front of you, probably ridiculously tired, but really thrilled because we'll have already made some headway into the Podcast-a-thon and presented you with a lot of information and inspiration by then, but we won't even be halfway through. So good morning. Hello to Jean. So happy that you're here with us. And for any of you, we're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and about a dozen other places. Traven's going to show you in just a second what all those places are. Today, our topic, we're going to be talking about top 10 things to ask for during an IEP meeting. This proved to be much harder than I thought it was going to be to narrow it down. And we're going to talk about basically 4 different areas of things that you would ask for in an IEP. First of all, there's setting, what the placement is, then there's services, then there's accommodations, and then there's the behavior intervention plan. We're going to focus mostly on the accommodations, but we're going to touch on the other 3 things as well. We've done longer shows about those. It's just hard to couch it all in the one space because it all interconnects, right? But we're going to do our level best to provide you with some really hardcore, fun things to ask for in your IEP meeting that maybe nobody has told you before that you can ask for. We're going to try to empower you so that you'll have some ideas. It's not one size fits all, though. That's the other part of it, too. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But look, our fabulous Traven is already showing you, if you're watching the podcast, he's showing you some of the ways that you can be watching, some of the ways that you can tune in, some of the ways that you can participate. We hope that you'll want to do that because, can I be honest, it's much more fun for us when you guys participate. Like, that's the honest truth. Because really, good morning, Anna. So thrilled that you're here. Yes. Do you live in Southern California, Anna? Because I see you've got sun and rain and thunderstorms. And we had a little bit of sun the last couple of days, but we are building an ark here in Los Angeles. I know people around the world are like, really? You people in LA, after you've been through so many years of drought and you're going to complain about water? Oh, yeah, you're in Riverside. So you know exactly what, because you are Riverside no matter where you are right now if you live in this area, right? We're all living next to the river. Yeah, we're not set up for it. It's, the only thing that I think we're less set up for is snow. So Jean's watching from Kentucky. What's the weather like there? Because aren't we getting close to the Kentucky Derby? It's got to be close to that. And I always think spring and mint julep when I start thinking Kentucky Derby. I was raised in Saratoga, New York, which is upstate New York, where horse racing is the thing. Oh, it's cold there. I'm sorry. It's cold here too, but not on the same level of cold. I feel confident. It's cold for LA, but that's still not all that cold. And you would think, having grown up in upstate New York, where there's just snow, and more snow, that I moved to Los Angeles for a reason now, didn't I? But you would think I would be more prepared, but we are really attached to our sunshine here. We get a little dysregulated, all of us as a group of people. Everybody's a little crabby and short fuse in Los Angeles right now because we all have group seasonal affective disorder because we have not had enough sun. Liliana, good morning to you. So thrilled that you're here. I hope you guys will be a part of this conversation that we're going to talk about these things that we ask for at IEP meetings. But before we do that, I'm going to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, that the Autism Podcast-a-thon starts a week from yesterday. So it's on Tuesday that it starts. It'll be 6 p.m. that it starts Eastern time, but that's 3 p.m. Yeah, 3 p.m. I always get a little confused on that. It's on the 4th, but it's at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And please, if you haven't already, I say to people, you got to check out the calendar because the calendar is, hey, May, so thrilled to have you here. The calendar is chock full of stuff, and we keep piling more information. We've got more guests that we're revealing on a regular basis. Yesterday, I was able to put Dr. Steve Edelson on there. He is the director of the Autism Research Institute, and he is one of those luminaries that Dr. Granpeesheh is going to be interviewing, because she's doing some own interviews aside from time with me, so you guys are going to love that. Don't forget that Temple Grandin is going to be with us on the first evening. We've got, so great, because back to back we have an hour with Dr. Stephen Shore and then an hour with Temple Grandin. You know, it doesn't get better than that. And Temple on that day has Dr. Grandin, excuse me, Temple. Dr. Grandin on that day has a new book coming out that's titled Autism and Education as I See It. And it's written specifically in different categories for students, for parents, and for educators. Woohoo. So we're excited we get to have her on the day that the book comes out. I can't wait to get my paws on it, because you know, this is a very important subject to me and something we're taking on today. So amazing. I also want to tell you that we started our fundraiser the other day, that we have come to an understanding and agreement. During each one, it's not a telethon. I want to be very clear about that. This is not a telethon, and the purpose of this is not to raise money. The purpose of this is to share information and inspiration, but for each hour that we're doing, we've asked for ourselves and for our guest hosts to let you know about a charity that they think is really important, that's doing something. So they might be saying to you, if you want to donate to something, here's something that you could donate. Remember that you can donate time, you can donate your Facebook page or your social media by promoting that charity, or you can donate what's in the couch cushions, right? So for our hours, for Autism Live hours, and I believe, because Dr. Granpeesheh and I put our heads together on this, we really wanted to raise some money for Act Today for iPads, because I firmly believe that functional communication is a human right, and we now know how to give people functional communication, the ability to ask for what they want, desire, hope for, to communicate their individual needs, right? And it isn't the same for everybody. And sometimes people need an auxiliary device that can help them to communicate with other people. We know that iPads, they're lighter, they are very low cost relatively to other things, and there are tons of apps that can be loaded onto them. And there's, you know, everybody walks around with an iPad now, so there's no stigma attached to it. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I wanted to make sure that at the end of the podcast-a-thon that we could get some iPads into some very deserving people's hands. And you know, this may even be you, if you're somebody who is like, I need one, or my kiddo needs one to communicate, and that's around a $7 chunk of change that maybe you don't have laying around on the couch cushions. So we are taking donations pretty much starting now through the last hour of the podcast-a-thon, and I have said that if we can raise $5,000 between now and then, Dr. Granpeesheh, I have the clippers, they're already charged. Dr. Granpeesheh is going to shave my head bald on the air. So, you know, this is high fun. I'm all jazzed about it. I want for her to shave my head. I'm like, don't feel sorry for me. We actually did this once before, 10 years ago. This is how my hair stayed white 10 years ago. And it's almost 10 years to the day that we will be doing this. We did an informational promotional piece. It's a long story, but to support a dad who had brain cancer, Ryan Oaf, I want to say his name, what an amazing young man. This was something that at my niece's church, he went to her church, and they asked there were people who had agreed to sponsor. If men would shave their head, they would give $100 to the family, and if women would shave their head, they would give $300. And no woman in the church, there was like 10 men who offered to do it, and there wasn't a single woman who offered to shave her head. And I heard that at a time that was very emotionally charged for me. It was about 4 days after my mom had died, which was one day after the Newtown shooting. And I felt like there was so much ick in the world, and that I wanted to do something nice for somebody else that I could. And I said, I will shave my head for Ryan. And then suddenly it turned into this circus, and we ended up doing it on the air, and it was life-changing for me. that that I got an opportunity to talk with this amazing young dad who knew that he was coming to the end of his days and was fighting valiantly to spend as much time with his young daughter. And, you know, it's a silly thing, really, to shave your head. But to do it to support somebody else, it was life-changing for me. Now we're here 10 years later, and I'd like to do that again. I'd like to change somebody's life. I'd like to put an iPad in somebody's hands so that they can speak. I got all emotional on you, but what better could I do with this muff of hair? It's so not important to me. I know it's very important to other people, but I enjoyed being bald, happy to be bald, you know, bring it on. So let's share with people. There it is, givebetter.com, iPad challenge, and you know, you can donate $1. But we'd love to get to $5,000. So Jean says, yes, iPads and Go Talk Now are super important to my grandson, and it has aired boxes. I'm not sure what that means. iPads cost $500, communication app $200, afterbox $50 to $100. Thanks for this. Yeah, and listen, there are people out there who know that their kids need an iPad and they can't afford it. So we get a lot of requests for Autism Care Today, which is the charity that Dr. Granpeesheh started, asking for iPads, and there's never been enough money to fund them all. So I would like to donate my bald head in a way to OtterBoxes. Thank you. I love OtterBoxes. OtterBoxes are amazing to keep the device. I have an OtterBox on my phone, and everybody makes fun of my OtterBox, but I've never had a phone break. And when a kiddo is living with an iPad, it's going to take some, you know, it's going to fall on the ground. These things happen, and you want to preserve the things. So OtterBox is great. There's another one too that I think is called Life that's really amazing. What apps are on the iPad for communication? Trying to transition from PECS to iPad. It's so funny. Let me see if I can find, before we get to the end of the show, there are many. Proloquo 2 is one of the most famous, and I have nothing bad to say about it other than it's expensive. Lifesaver, thank you, Jean. But there is another app that is much less expensive that is recommended to us by the person that we always talk to about iPads, and I had asked Dr. Granpeesheh to ask her because I couldn't remember the name of it, and I know that Dr. Granpeesheh texted me. I think it's called Teach to Talk. I'll find it. Go Talk, Proloquo to go. But there's one that I'll find the name of it for you. Remind me before we're done. I will find it. I don't know how I'm going to talk and find at the same time, but I will find it for you. Maybe if I just look under what Sue has said. But anyway, yes, sorry. Now I'm in my phone. Now I'm a full-on Luddite and in my phone. We'll come back to it, but I will find out the name of it. Even if it's not this hour, I'll find it out for you. And there are several that are good, right? But we'll make sure that we know. Okay, so anyway, if you have $1 to donate, great. Don't feel pressured to do that. But that's the fundraiser that we're going to be participating in. Obviously, we now have, I think it's like 30 different podcasters that are going to be doing takeover hours, and they're all going to share other charities with you as well, all of which are great. I didn't notice my keyboard is turned around. I must have switched it and didn't realize. But let's get into this because this is a lot to cover and we really only have an hour. And I need to start sticking to the hour thing because once we get into the podcast-a-thon, I can't go over. It's somebody else's time. So today we're talking about the top 10 things to ask or, I love, can you tell I'm already tired? Ask for in an IEP meeting. Yes, I proofread these things, but my vision is going. Top 10 things to ask for in an IEP meeting. And by the way, this is a parent-to-parent talk. I am not, I'm a former teacher. I'm a person who has sat on both sides of the IEP table, but I am not a legal person. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a registered advocate. I'm an ally, and I hope an advocate, and a former teacher, and a still parent. But none of this can take the place of talking with a lawyer, talking with an educational advocate, an educational specialist. But these are some parent-to-parent things that I've learned along the way and learned from other parents and learned from teachers and learned from experience that I think can give you the shortcut to help you to know what you're dealing with. So first of all, when we go into an IEP meeting, what we're determining is what is FAPE. Because your child is entitled, if they have a qualifying diagnosis, which autism is a qualifying diagnosis, they are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. We talked about this the other day. Well, free means it's not going to cost you anything. So if anybody tries to hand you a bill for $1.34, you go, that's not free, right? We know what public is, and you're entitled to have it in the public setting at your local public school, unless the public school says, we are not able to give you FAPE, in which case they have to pay for you to get it in another place, a non-public school. That's life, right? And an education. Well, we argue about that a little bit, but the word that we're mostly going to argue about is that appropriate thing. That we have to, and by the way, it's called an IEP because it stands for Individualized Education Program. I know that in some states they have changed the name of it so that it's an ARD or other things. It's still an IEP, and your child has the school has a legal obligation, your child has a legal right to get an IEP that provides FAPE. So an individualized education program that provides the free, appropriate public education. And if we look further into IDEA, which I made a plea the other day that, hey, President Biden, we would like that fully funded, thank you. Could you be the first president in the history of mankind to fully fund IDEA like you promised us? I will say only nice things if you will just do that. Jill, could you talk to him about that? Because it needs to be bumped up. I don't know if you heard, it's now 1 in 36 kids, which means that every single classroom has a kid on the spectrum. When would be a good time? How about now? Okay, that's my little PSA for today. But going back to what we're talking about, the language of IDEA says that your child is entitled to a free, appropriate public education that provides a floor of opportunity in which to access the curriculum. Let's back that bus up a little bit. So that your child has a floor of opportunity in which to access the curriculum. And it further goes on to say a lot of different things about what setting and where you have it. So before you go into an IEP meeting, when I'm talking to a parent and they're all like, I got an IEP meeting, I usually say to them, like, let's just close our eyes for a minute. Let's just close our eyes for a minute and think about what you would like to see happen next year. Like, what is your ideal picture of what school looks like for your child? And I find that parents, their gut is usually pretty right on the money. Now, occasionally, sometimes somebody isn't being realistic, but I find that's really not normally the case. I think often the mom or the dad really has a sense of where their child needs to be. Yes, Liliana says appropriate can be interpreted in many different ways. Yeah, and that's the rub, right? That's what we're going to be arguing about. What is appropriate for this person? But here's the thing. If we can use this to our advantage, right? By the way, the school can use it to their advantage too. But when you say to them, listen, here's what I want, and if you say, and here's why I think it's appropriate, then they have to tell you why they think it's not appropriate. And it's dicey for them, right? It's really dicey for them. So that's why we're having this conversation before I get into the top 10 things. And then once I get to the top 10 things, I'm gonna run through them really fast, and then we're gonna go back and do them longer. But we gotta set the stage here first, that before we even talk about the 10 things you're asking for, I want us to be clear about what are we looking for. So if you've closed your eyes and you've meditated and visualized and thought, here's what I would like it to look like. First of all, I got to ask you, what setting are you looking at? And really, they're like all these different gradations, but I narrowed it down to like 3 to see which one we come closest to fitting in. Do you want your child in full inclusion? And hey, there's no right or wrong answer among these 3 things. It's about what you think is appropriate for your child, what you think is appropriate for your child. They all come with rubs, they all come with pluses, right? Full inclusion. You know, I mean, it's done right, it's brilliant, right? Done wrong, it's not. And a lot of places do it wrong. And if you're pulling for full inclusion, which means that your kiddo is going to be in a classroom with neurotypical kids all day long, you're going to have to do some work. You're going to have to keep checking on things. You're going to deal with some really not fun moments where somebody makes fun of your kid. You're going to be on guard and you're going to fight for your kid. But there's reasons why to have them fully included. If it's important to you that your child graduates with a high school diploma, you might be pulling for full inclusion. If you want your child to be socializing and to be learning that aspect of it too, full inclusion might be important. If you think that your child has at least a fighting chance at being able to access that curriculum, because you look at your kiddo and you go, I see a smart kid. Yep, they've got some holes in knowledge here and they've got some sensory issues and they got this going on, but there's a brain in there that needs a lot of information, and to put them in some place where they're not constantly moving might not be good for them, then you might be looking at full inclusion. So that's one choice. Partial inclusion is another choice, that your child can be in an inclusive class for a certain number of hours a day, and they can go someplace else for another certain number of hours a day, and you can set that however you want. And schools now, they've had time now to recognize, oh, somebody's going to come in and they're going to want this, they're going to want that, and they like to streamline everything. And they go, well, we have this program, and we have this program, and your child needs to fit into this program. This is a lie. This is crap on a stick. Okay, you've made this program, that's wonderful, but my child is entitled to an individualized education program. And if their plan doesn't fit your child, then they got to come up with a plan that does. So don't let them shoehorn your child. Don't let them fit your child to the program that they already have. They need to fit their program to your child. That's the law, but it's going to take some work, yeah? And I think, you know, as much as you got to watch them in full inclusion, you got to watch them in partial inclusion, because a lot of times they'll just take them to the mainstream class and park them there. They don't really get anything. And there are lots of ways that they fudge it. We might have that conversation another time. And then, of course, there's special day class, where it means that the whole day they are going to be in an enclosed environment where maybe it's a smaller number of students. There are going to be other students that have issues being in full inclusion. In some ways, people go, oh, I like it because it's more sheltered. But in other ways, your child might be with children who are having huge sensory issues. So there's pluses and minuses. There is no wrong or right, but what does your gut say? Where do you envision your child being? And it's personal. And every child is different. And I have, you know, I used to be inclusion. And then I saw the kinds of inclusion people were doing, and I was like, okay, I'm not always on the full inclusion thing. And I've seen some amazing special day classes, and I've seen some amazing partial inclusion classes. And I've seen some kiddos that smart, but they can't handle the sensory overload of being in the full inclusion. There are lots of good reasons to pick, and you probably know better for your child, but it's going to color what you ask for. That's why we need to bring this up. And then when we talk about curriculum, so decide what setting you want, and school will tell you, no, these two things go hand in hand. And I'm going to tell you not necessarily. So if your child, it might be that your child has autism and an intellectual disability, and you know that maybe already that, you know, you're not as concerned about the high school diploma thing. Your child's in second grade and you already know that's going to be a struggle, and I'm not as concerned about that. But your child really loves to socialize but needs to work on it a little bit, and you might say, I want the full inclusion, but my child is not going to be able to handle the full curriculum in that classroom. Then you can make the decision for modified curriculum or individualized curriculum. By the way, the school's going to lose their mind and go, if you can't keep up in the class, then you have to go to the special day class. No, that's not really true. It isn't. They can tell you that that's the way they want it because that's how their program runs. But then there is this thing called the individualized education program. So, you get to decide and mix and match how you want these things to go. but there are considerations for all of them. And I would say that if you are going to send your child into even partial inclusion, I'm going to recommend that you ask for a one-on-one aid. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. So here we go. We're gonna get to our top 10. I'm going to breeze through these, and then I'm going to go back and talk about them specifically. And realize that there's a wide spectrum of kiddos that need different things, but you know, and ages and settings and curricula. So we're going to talk about all these things. But my number one tip of things to ask for in an IEP meeting, it's a one-to-one aid. And it will make you unpopular. I can live with that. Can you live with that? Absolutely, because I've seen when you have a good one-on-one aid in a classroom, what can happen. And by the way, your child is entitled, if they can exist in the mainstream classroom or in any classroom with accommodations, then they are entitled to the accommodations, including this. So we will talk about this in a second, but it's key, right? Number two, this is something that a lot of times we forget to ask for. It's a simple check on the IEP box. Some schools will just offer it to you, but if they don't, ask for preferential seating. If you already have it in the IEP, it's going to make your life so much easier, because I guarantee you stuff's going to happen in the classroom. And especially right now where class sizes are bigger than what any of us think is advisable. And there's always some girl with a swishy ponytail that's going to distract your child, and that's just one example. You might find that during the winter, your child can't sit by the windows because that's where the radiator is and it gets too hot for them. So your child needs to be moved to the other side of the classroom. But during the summer, you know, that's, you know, it's better for them. Whatever it is, if you have the preferential seating, then there's no argument. You have it. Number three, make sure that you get more time on tests, assignments, and homework. Now, if your child's in kindergarten, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't think I really need that. It's just a box on the IEP. Ask to have it checked. Your life will go easier. And it'll automatically carry over into first grade and whatever, and when you end up really needing it, it will be there, because you don't know when you're going to need it, and you might need it in kindergarten. You might. People are weird. Number four, you're going to put in there for frequent breaks. You can call them sensory breaks, whatever. And basically, they're going to put in a system where your child can ask for a break. And we're going to get into this more when we talk. But you want it to be in there that your child has the right to ask for and get frequent breaks. Number five, this one I would never have thought to do. And the person who told me to do this, it's like I want to kiss them on the lips, because it is going to save you a lot of time, effort, and energy, and your child getting scoliosis. Ask for a second set of books and materials for home. Now, this means everything. So, and, you know, I know that a lot of high schools, everything is on an iPad or on a computer now, and they don't actually have books. But they say that, and then they send home a book, because, you know, they're reading this book or they're reading this play, and they actually will send home a book. So always have this in your IEP so that you have the books at home, because I will tell you what happens. It becomes Friday night. Either your child is bringing home a bag full of books that would hobble anyone, right? An adult male couldn't lift this bag, right? Or they don't bring the book home, and it's Friday night, and there you are, and they have an assignment that's due, and you're like, I don't even have the book. So always ask for the second set of books and materials for home. They're not going to love you for it, but they'll get over it. You'll be happier that you have it. Just, you know, keep them in one place in your house so that you can return them at the end of the year, or they will charge you for them. Been there, done that. You're going to ask for testing accommodations. Again, in kindergarten, it's going to feel like, why am I asking for this? Guess what? They give assessments or tests to kindergartners as well. And if you have the testing accommodations in there, it's going to help you all throughout their career. And clearly, if you have children that are older than kindergarten, you already want this in there. If your kiddo is, this is individualized, right? So your kiddo might be somebody that gets distracted really easily, and or that when it's really quiet, it makes them nervous, right? Or they're not capable of being quiet. There are so many reasons why they would, and that what will happen is they will assign a person to come and get your child and take them to the library where they will sit with just them and take the test, right? Now, for some kiddos, this is a nightmare. For my son, if he needed to take the test wherever he was normally, if you took him out of that environment, it would throw him off, right? So our testing accommodation was that they couldn't move him, right? And they would mess that up. But this is a great one to have on there. Number 7, we're talking about services. You are entitled to ask for and potentially get speech, OT, adaptive physical education, which is that APE resource. We'll talk more about this in a second. And tutoring. And any of these can be push in or pull out. Pull out is when they come to the classroom door, they take your child and they go someplace else to do it. That's all very well and good, but I always ask for that to not be during curriculum time. I think I have that on here. But a push in is when the speech person, the OT person, or the adaptive physical comes into the classroom to work with them. So it's an entirely different thing, and you'll want to know about that depending on what's happening with your child. I see you guys are writing things in. I'm going to get to it again in a minute. Number 8, sensory considerations. That if your child needs to have something to chew on, that they have the ability to chew on it. If they need water to stay calm on a regular basis, the school might have a policy about no water bottles on the desk, but your child can have one. Your child might need a fidget. Your child might need a ball to sit on. Anything that comes under the heading of sensory, we want to put that in there as well. And then we want personalized instruction aids. They have a place on the IEP where they can write this kind of stuff in. This might be a keyboard for a child who's struggling with handwriting. It might be a special pencil. It might be a calculator when they're doing math. It might be a ruler when they're doing math. There's so many different things that they can have. For some kids, it might be colored paper if they have dyslexia to put over the whatever the words are to help them to be able to read. Your child might need specialized glasses. Whatever it is that's personalized to them, it might mean that they have notes that are next to them. All of these things you can ask for within the IEP. And then, of course, the last one I think probably as important as anything else other than the IEP, the aid, the one-on-one aid, is a behavior intervention plan. If there is anything that your child is engaging in the classroom that makes it difficult for them or someone else to have that floor of opportunity to access the curriculum, anything, then you need to have a behavior intervention plan. And that has to be a well thought out behavior intervention plan, and they have to check the box on the IEP that behavior intervention plan is included, because when that box is checked, it now becomes part of that IEP, and it's a legally binding document that the school has to follow, and if they don't, then they are in trouble in a big, big way. So we really want this. If you get and this can happen at any time. If you're in the middle of the school year and you don't have a behavior intervention plan because everything was going great and your child wasn't exhibiting any behavior that would prevent them or anybody else from accessing the curriculum, and then all of a sudden you get a note home saying, Billy kicked a boy in the lunch line today. Don't let that go. Like, you need to be asking questions about what happened before, why did he do it, what was the consequence that you gave him, and if it happens more than once, you need to get a behavior intervention plan going. So, because what that does is it looks at, he didn't just kick somebody for no good reason. I know everybody thinks, oh, well, every once in a while, people just kick people. They don't. It's a lot of energy to kick somebody. So why? Why did he kick somebody? First of all, did they kick him first? Because I would want to know that, right? Like, is he being bullied? But what happens sometimes is when somebody is being bullied and they turn around and return it, then they get in trouble, right? So behavior intervention plan is going to identify, why is this happening? Why did he, did the person cut in line in front of him? In what way did he not have a better way to communicate than hitting, right? And then the behavior intervention plan is going to say, okay, so we think the function of this behavior is he did it for attention. He liked the person and they weren't playing with him on the playground, whatever it is, then it's going to teach him a different way to get his needs met. And it's going to put in a reasonable consequence. Like they're going to try to prevent it from happening in the future, but if it does happen, there will be a reasonable consequence. And the you get that all mapped out and you check on the IEP, great, now it's a part of it. Because we see all the time when there isn't a behavior intervention plan, what do you think happens? What do you think the consequence is? Well, it's anything that the teacher can think of, right? And sometimes that's not fair, measured, or going to help your student at all. We've had police called, and we've had children handcuffed at school because nobody knew how to deal with the behavior. And if there's a behavior intervention plan, they better know how to deal with it, or they're going to be writing you a check, you know? Which is not the be-all, end-all, right? What we really want is for our children to be treated fair and fairly at school. And the behavior intervention plan is the best plan to be able to do that. Okay, let me look at some questions here, and then we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to talk about all of it. So Joe says, hi, Shannon, for ABA training, I know you've always advocated for BCBA. However, majority of the providers only have a BCBA do evaluation and then someone else doing the training. How can I get a BCBA? Well, let's be clear though, Joe, you should have a BCBA on your case somewhere, but no, you're absolutely right. Most of the time, the person who's providing the care is not the BCBA. That would be the RBTs or the BCATs or people who are working to either of those certifications. The RBT, which is a registered behavior technician, the BCAT, which is a behavioral, oh my goodness, board certified autism technician is what it is. That's what a BCAT is. So most insurance, though, requires the RBT, which I don't understand why that is, but okay. Because I would rather, personally, a registered behavior technician, there's certain training that they have to go through, but it's more extensive to have the BCAT. Many people have both because more insurance will take the RBT. I don't know how that shook down, but they are usually the people who are doing the therapy with the individuals. That has changed a little bit with some of the things that have happened with insurance and the environment of not enough employees, that occasionally you'll find a BCBA who is actually doing the therapy, but that is super duper rare, and it's really expensive because what you pay a BCBA per hour is sometimes double and triple what you would pay an RBT. Usually the RBTs are people who are being overseen by the BCBA. It's sort of like the model of doctors and nurses, right? The doctor has to prescribe the medicine, and the doctor is responsible for looking at the tests, evaluating, and saying, here's the direction that we need to go in. But the nurse is the one who actually does the work, right? And nurses are highly trained and know what they're doing, but they're not doctors. And doctors know different things than nurses. Nurses know different things than doctors. So my favorite thing in the world is a BCBA who used to be an RBT. I like, when RBTs tell me that they're, or people who are studying to get their RBT and they say, I want to be a BCBA, and I go, oh, baby BCBAs, because those are the best BCBAs. They have a finesse because they understand what it's like to work with the child. They program the best. I'm sorry, that's my opinion. But yeah, I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't want the least qualified person in the room to be the person who's actually doing the work with my child. I understand that. I used to feel that when I first started out. But if you are lucky enough to have what I had, which was, it wasn't just one person, but one person in particular who came into my home who, I just refer to him as an autism whisperer, and he wasn't a BCBA. He wasn't even an RBT at that point. There wasn't an RBT designation, and he was amazing with my kid. And he, absolutely amazing. And every single person who's a BCBA at some point wasn't a BCBA. So, I would be looking at who are the people who's working with your child. And basically what you want is the BCBA to be a good architect and the RBTs to be able to be passionate and have the finesse that we were talking about progressive ABA the other day, that they're really making it individualized. Apostolus says, I have to go to the house. I'll be ready to go to the house the same place as the last time I can. And I don't know what that means, Apostolus, but write and tell me more. Okay, Liliana says, schools love to challenge me when we request the special circumstances instructional assistance assessment for the one-on-one aid. Oh, Liliana, I need to know more about that. Because I am not familiar, the special circumstances instructional assistance assessment, is that for your child or for the aid? I don't know about that. I'm not familiar with that name. Jean says, my grandson sits on a ball daily in school. Yeah, some kids do because it activates their core. I don't know if you, like in offices now, for a while it was really big for people to have, instead of having office chairs, they had balls, and it helped them to access their core and sit up straight. And for some people that are fidgeters, it helps to focus them. So yeah, absolutely. For some kids, it is the thing. Liliana says, I always advise parents in the section of requesting accommodations, please make sure that all accommodations are addressed and written very specific to the needs of the child. Amen to that, sister. Jean says, should we have a functional behavior assessment done before behaviors and put a plan in place? Absolutely. It would be added to the IEP. Our school tried to tell us that it would be in place of the IEP. Oh, Jean, this scares me, but yeah, it's not in place of the IEP. And yes, they should do whenever there is a behavior that is identified as something that is coming into play that is preventing your child either from accessing the curriculum or others around them from accessing the curriculum, the very first step that they need to do is a functional behavior assessment. That's that part where I was talking about where they figure out, why is this behavior happening? It's not happening because they have autism. Sorry, but it's not happening because they have autism. When people say that, we want to take that, crumple it up, and go, pata. No, these are people, and they engage in behaviors for a reason. So, and it's not because they have a diagnosis of autism. Autism might be contributing to it in that they can't communicate what's going on, but we can't just go, oh, well, it's autism. That's not the way this works. We want to look at why, like if they're biting, why are they biting? If they're hitting, why are they hitting? If they're tired all the time, why are they tired all the time, right? If they're sleeping, there's a reason why, right? And we need to know what the reason is, and we don't want to just guess, and so that's why there's something called the functional behavior assessment. They figure out what is the function of the behavior, what purpose is it serving, right? And then there are different parts of the behavior intervention plan where there's the antecedent modification, which is how do we prevent it from happening? Which is not to say, people always think, oh, well, you're just trying to shut it down. No. If we figure out what the function of the behavior is, and the function of the behavior is I need attention, then we're going to give you attention in an appropriate way before you engage in the behavior so that you don't need the behavior. We're not saying we're not giving you attention. There's a very fine difference there, and it's really, really important. We find a way for them to get that function another way. That's the antecedent modification. Then we try to teach them better ways of communicating what it was that they needed, because it might be that they needed a break. And so we teach them, I hold up this card, and that means I get a break, right? And then we have a consequence strategy, which is if all else has failed and this behavior happens, what is the consequence for it? Which nobody is going to write into that document, we handcuff them. We call the police and handcuff them because that's redonkulous, right? But when we make a behavior intervention plan, it never takes the place of an IEP. And if people are telling you that it's going to take the place of the IEP, I would clarify because maybe we got something lost in the laundry here, but it gets attached to the IEP, and there's a place on the IEP in the front page usually where it says BIP attached, and you check the box and it now becomes one and all. But a behavior intervention plan is for a specific behavior, and it's to make sure that everybody stays safe and on track, right? But an IEP is an individualized education plan, and they go together but they are not one and the same. So I worry about if they really think that a BIP takes the place of an IEP. I don't know. That's a problem, because that would be wrong. Okay, so let's go back through this. And I've already talked about the accommodations a little bit. And we could spend hours talking about this, but it's so individualized. And like I said, I usually go with the gut of the parent. If I say to you, what are you looking for? What kind of setting? What kind of, especially the setting. I think parents kind of know what they think about this. A lot of times the school's going to try to talk you out of it. You don't have to be talked out of it. You don't have to be talked out of it. There's a way to make it work. It might be more work for you and more work for them. And you know what? If you're up for it, they don't get a choice. You might have to fight for it, but I'm all about fighting. If it's what's right for the child, if it's what's appropriate, let's fight. Why not? My feeling was, I'd rather get to the end of his school career and know that I fought for things, and that I put that effort in, and that, you know, I didn't have to look back and go, oh, why didn't we do this and why didn't we do that? And it's so funny because I fought, and it was exhausting. I don't want to candy coat it. It was really exhausting. And there were times that I cried and sobbed and said, you know, why does it have to be this hard? Right? But this is why I gave the Kabuki Theater talk the other day about, you know, the parent who said to me, just don't let it be that hard. Just put the mask on and do the work, but don't let it be that hard. And here's the thing, looking back now, because my son is about to finish his sophomore year of college, I don't regret a single thing that I fought for. Not a single thing. Not once, not ever. I'll tell you what I do regret is that there was one year where it was the second day of school, and I could see that this teacher was like going to be a problem. And somebody who doesn't know anything about autism, doesn't really know anything about school, said, why are you not listening to your gut? Move him now. And I said, no, because you have to give everybody a chance, and you know, it's an educational opportunity, and I'm going to stay on it, and it's going to be okay. And it really wasn't. It really wasn't. And we got to the end of the year, and it really wasn't okay. And we spent years rebuilding up my son's self-esteem because I didn't listen to my gut. And I said, we'll work with, instead of just moving him. So I will say to you that if your gut says, you know, at any point when you're talking to people, if you go, I don't think these people's heads are in the right place, and I know that I have the legal right to fight for my child here, but these people aren't looking like they're going to get it. And if your gut is saying maybe I should move them to another school or another classroom, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'm going to tell you, I wished I'd listened to my gut, right? So don't be afraid to fight, but don't feel like it's the end of the world either, because you're going to win. You're going to win, or you're going to move your kid, and your kid is going to get what they need. Like, let's just start from that knowledge, and that there's a way to. So you can let that part be calm. You're going to get what you need. Let's talk about the one-to-one aid. So schools don't like to pay for one-on-one aids because they're expensive. And I don't know that schools really understand how to effectively use a one-on-one aid. And everybody needs a one-on-one aid in different ways. And so I can't just carte blanche say, well, a one-on-one aid does this. There are different things for different kiddos and different ages and different abilities, right? That in the beginning, if you have a one-on-one aid in the classroom, in a kindergarten classroom, they might be, you know, we used to call them shadows. And that's literally what they do, is they shadow your kid everywhere, and they prompt them, and they help them stay on task, and they help them to turn their, you know, their paper in, and motor them from place to place so that they're where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, attending to what they need to attend to. But the aide is also looking and saying, I see escalation, so we need to take a break, and says to them, hey, do you want to ask for a break? And things that the teacher can't possibly have the eyes, hands, arms, and legs to be able to do when they've got 25 to 45 other kids in the classroom. You know, it would be lovely if a teacher had that ability and that level to focus, but the fact of the matter is that with that many bodies in the room, they don't have the ability to do that for one kid. And probably there are other kids in the classroom who also need the one-on-one aid, that maybe their parents didn't fight for it, and maybe the school made it hard for them to fight for it. But I always say to people, you got to fight for your kid. What does your kid need? What is appropriate for your child? If I could wave a magic wand and say, I'm going to send your child to third grade, and I'm going to put them in a totally mainstream classroom, but I'm going to put them with a person who is going to be with them the whole time, who's going to help them to stay on task, who, if they, drop their paper on the floor, instead of it sitting there for 5 minutes, that they'll prompt your child to get the paper, go back. They're gonna, if interactions are happening that aren't good, they're gonna be prompting your child and the child that the interaction is with for the interaction to go better. They're gonna help your child to, when everybody else lines up for the bell and your child isn't lined up for the bell, they're gonna help motor them. And all along the way, the whole thing with an aide, a good aide, has to be working themselves out of a job, that they can't make the child dependent upon them. And school loves to hit this note. They'll say, oh, well, we see with this that with one-on-one aides, the child becomes dependent upon it. Sure, if it's a bad aide, why aren't you training your aides better? Why aren't they working themselves out of a job? Because they don't want to train their aides better, or they don't want to spend the money to do it. But a good aide is prompting the child, and then the next time looks to see, does the child do it without them? And if they don't, then they step in and prompt, but they're constantly, making the prompt a little bit less, hoping that there will be a time that the child can do it on their own. What happens with a good one-on-one aid is that the child has access to the curriculum. That's what they have the legal right to. Your child has a legal right to be in the classroom that they would have been in had they not had a diagnosis, with any accommodations that they need to be in that classroom to make it happen. That is literally the letter of the law, and yet the default for schools is, let's put them in a special day class. Now, a special day class might be perfect for your child, and usually in a special day class what they do is they'll have a smaller number of students, maybe they have 10 students, and there are 2 aides that work for everybody in the classroom. But because everybody in the classroom has high needs, sometimes that literally isn't enough. And I always say, look at the situation, look at the aides, look at the teachers, have honest, open communication. Sometimes this is when you turn off the tape recorder, because you want to be able to say things to them in the IEP meeting and say, okay, let's talk turkey. Like, how many people are going to be in the classroom? How much can this teacher handle? Is someone really going to be able, because I don't want my child falling between the cracks. And that can happen in absolutely any setting. That can happen in the special day class. It can happen in a hybrid model where they're being included and going to the special day class. It can happen when they're in the mainstream class. So I think it's the first fight is to get the aid, right? And to get it written into the IEP. Then we can talk about how do you get the most out of your one-on-one aid. But you're not going to get the most out of your one-on-one aid unless there's one in the IEP. And once they're in the IEP, then it's funded. And it's hard to take it away from you. They're going to try. And here's what they'll do a lot of times. They'll say, well, we'll do it for the first 6 weeks of school, or we'll do it, from now to the end of the year, but then we're going to have an IEP in the fall and we're going to evaluate. And I'm all about that. Say, oh, yep, let's definitely do that. Because they're going to have to, if you're smart, when you go to the next IEP and they go, all right, so we're going to fade the aid out, and we're going to go, I don't really think it's time yet. I think we should extend that a little bit. I extended it for a lot of years. And the school hated me. That's okay. My son is doing well. Anna says, I requested a one-on-one aid, and I had an IEP in the middle of the year to request the one-on-one aid. That was January. I have yet to hear what the assessment concluded regarding my request. I requested a one-on-one aid for staying on task, redirection, making sure elopement is controlled. Anna, I'm giving you a hug. They're trying to run the clock down on you. And I would be very careful about that, because what they're going to do, this is classic textbook school, because they don't have the funding, and they're going to have to take it from someplace else. That's the long and the short of it. Don't let it stop you, because there is a time limit on how long after the assessment, and you got to push their buttons, and you have to tell them it has been too long. I requested a one-on-one aid. You requested an assessment. We have not had the, I'm calling for an emergency IEP meeting because if you don't have these assessment results, and I would have reasons. Here is why we see that our child is not able to do this, this, and this, and we've wasted this time. We would like, now they're going to scurry to get the results in, and they're going to come back and say, we don't think he needs a one-on-one aid. I'm just guessing. If I were you, I would be mounting your case about, here's an example, and I used to keep work samples of things. And for instance, there was one test way back when where my son, it was, the instructions said, there was like the first part of the instructions, please go through and circle every time. They were learning different things like simile and metaphor and hyperbole. So it was this list of statements, and it said, go through and circle everything that is hyperbole. Then go through and underline any similes, and then X out any metaphors, right? So my son read the directions, the first line, and went through and only circled the hyperbole and handed his paper in. And this came home. I'm a former teacher. And I know what it's like when you're teaching and when you've given a multi-step direction. And certainly in this, this world and in that age range that he was, this is the reason why teachers walk up and down the aisles, because you start to notice trends and you go, oh, and then you say to the whole class, hey, remember, there's not just one instruction, there's 3, right? So you would give that instruction to the whole class, knowing that more than one of them has missed number 2 and number 3. But then you circle back around and see, do I see, oh, this student, yes, this student underlined, and you go check the papers as they're working, and then you just point and go, read this, do this, right? So that the moment is captured. That's what a good teacher would do. But that's what a great aide would already be doing for our students, right? And so my son came home with his paper and he got a 30% on it because he only did a third of the work. And I held that paper up in the IEP and said, because they were like, no, the teacher can totally handle it. And I said, here's my evidence that the teacher can't. My son got a 30% on that, and educators understand. They looked at the paper and they were like, oh yeah, no, okay. She wasn't paying attention. Because she probably had too many kids in the classroom, but this is why he needs an aid. And so you can find that, go keep all of the work samples that he brings home and say, find the examples. And if you need help, you can email me. I'll look at papers with you. You can send me pictures of them, because there's always evidence. There's always evidence, right, of where an aid would have helped your child. And so you go in and say, here's, these examples of why he needs that and why it's appropriate, and why we've asked for it, and you are dragging us. But what they're trying to do is, because now you're at spring break, right? So they made it all that time without paying for the aid. And now they're going to say, well, we're almost to testing at the end of the year. And, maybe we should reevaluate in the fall, because when he does summer school, perhaps he won't need an aid. I wouldn't let them do that. I would push, push, push and tell them, no, we need an emergency IEP because I requested this and you've had more than 30 days and I've not heard from you. I would push, push, push them. But I do recommend fighting for a one-on-one aid. Now, is there a time and a place when the aid needs to be faded? Sure. But I find that it's always later than what everybody else says. And I'm even going to say that our ABA provider told us that we should get rid of our aid. And I didn't listen. And I said, nope, we're not there yet. And so we kept the aid for another year. And then I capitulated and we got rid of the aid for half of the year. And I didn't like how things were going. We brought the aid back, which is hard to do. I wouldn't recommend that you do that. But we did fade. And then we got to junior high. And they said, oh, we don't do aids in junior high. You have to go to special day class. We don't do aids in junior high because it's, ostracizing and he'll be bullied. And I said, no, that's your failure to stop bullying. And I asked for an executive function aid. So it was a person who literally had no contact with my son in the classroom, but sat in the back of the classroom, took notes, and then checked, gave their notes to my son so he had his notes and could check both of their notes. And they would give him reminders, to put in his planner and check his planner and go, okay, did you put this here because you have this paper? It was great. Set him up for success for high school. He went to high school with no assistance, is at college with no accommodations. That was our plan. That was our path. That was what we needed. I'm saying to you, figure out for yourself when the right time is. Listen to your gut. But there is a time and a place to fade the aid, and there's a time to get rid of the aid, but it's when your student doesn't need the aid anymore. And I think executive function, I fought for that executive function aid, and I thought that the school was going to come apart at the seams because they were like, we do not do this. This will not work, yada, yada, yada. And he was only in junior high for the 2 years where he went, and at the end, every single teacher that he had been in their classroom came up to me at graduation and said, we had no idea how this was going to work. It was the best thing ever. And now they do that for other students. It doesn't work for everybody, but for some students, that's brilliant and whatever. The preferential seating, I think this just makes sense, right? But I think it makes so much sense that sometimes we go, well, that's not going to be a problem. I'm not going to bother putting it in the IEP. Please don't make that mistake. Because if something gets contentious, then everything gets contentious, and you don't want this to be contentious. This should not be contentious. This actually comes under the heading of sensory things as well, but just put it in there. Just put it in there. More time on tests, assignments, and homework. Again, I think this makes a certain amount of sense too. The older your child gets, the more pushback you're going to get on this, because they're going to start saying there are consequences for things that are late, and you can start to negotiate this however you want it as your child gets older. But keep it there, keep it in place, because you never know when you're going to need it. And as your child progresses, they're going to move the goalposts more. Eventually, my son got to the point where if he needed to request more time for something, for an assignment, he had to ask for it in writing before the due date because they wanted him to be super responsible. It really taught him about managing his time. And if we had just not had that in place, there would have been things that he wouldn't have done well on, that he might have failed. And instead, if he had just a little bit more time, he got an A. But he was taught the consequences of more time and needing to communicate that he needed more time. It's a really, really important thing because there's lots of things that you're working on. You're working on knowing something, you're working on knowing it and regurgitating it, and then you're working on knowing, regurgitating, and doing it within a certain time frame. And I just feel like anything before college, even in college, I just like being able to do it within a certain time frame is the least important. Let's focus on learning something, learning it, and being able to regurgitate it in a responsible way. So take the time thing off the table. And again, if you have a kindergartner, we had a circumstance in first grade where we went through a couple of different teachers, and it might have been, no, it wasn't kindergarten, but in first grade, where the teacher marked him down because he handed in a homework assignment after the start of the class. And she was a teacher taking over, and I went in and I was like, what is this? And she was like, well, we have to have consequences. And I thought, lady, like, oh man, like seriously. And but it became a non-argument because it was in his IEP. Just have it there, and then it stays with you so that when they're in 5th grade, and it's there and you need it when you really need it. But every once in a while, you run into somebody younger in the younger classes. The break thing is super important, and this is across all of our kids, no matter what setting they're in, no matter what their ability to communicate, no matter their age. They need to be able to request a break. And this should be very clear about how often and how they request and what they're allowed to go to. That some kids are able to leave the classroom and go sit in somebody else's classroom or go to the resource room, or there's a corner where they can go and have quiet time, right? This has to be done with finesse because we don't want the child taking advantage of it. but to the point where that's all they do. And I think sometimes when somebody doesn't know how to do a break, it can turn into that. But I would honestly rather have people taking way too many breaks than not enough breaks, because we're going to see challenging behavior that happens if they don't get enough breaks. But we can finesse this and slowly fade it so that it's just the amount that they need. Everybody needs breaks. Everybody. It's only fair. The second set of books, I think I talked enough about this in the first time, but it's not just the books, it's the materials too. Sometimes in the younger grades, they have manipulatives that the kids have to help them count, right? You ask for another set to get sent home. Don't let them push you around on this. This is really important. The testing accommodations, I think we talked about that enough. It's super important that you outline what it is and what it is that you would like. That it could be a different setting. It could be, you've already asked for more time, but they need to be accommodated. I can't even read what that one says. Oh, it's the one about speech, OT, APE, resource, tutoring, and the push-in, pull-out. Okay, let's take this for a second. So on your services page, it's going to say, because first you have your settings, then you have your services page, and these are things that come under services. So if you're going to do speech, it'll outline and it'll say how many minutes, and there's this whole math equation that they have to do, and it drives me crazy that they do it this way. But basically it shakes down to, there's a pool of minutes, and they'll say, so we're going to do speech once a week or twice a week for this many minutes, right? And it's supposed to be individualized. A lot of times it's not. It's very cookie cutter. This is one where you don't have to argue if you think that it's appropriate amount, right? Depending on how much your child needs speech and how good the speech and language pathologist is and how useful the time is, we had a speech path that was so amazing, so amazing, that I loved it whenever my son got to spend time with her. And she tried to put things into real world. So he had a period of time where he would go to her when he was younger and they would work just one-on-one. But then as he got older, she had something called Lunch Bunch, and he would come to lunch and it would be a bunch of students, some who had speech difficulties and some who didn't, and they would play games. And she was fabulous because she would put the lesson into the game. Oh, wonderful. And it became a social thing, but a social language thing. You want to fight for that, right? Ask them what you want, right? And if that sounds good to you for your child, ask them, do you have something like this? But they're going to say, is it one-to-one speech, or is it small group, or is it large group speech? Get a feel for what you want, but then make sure that they do it. A lot of times schools will set this up and they'll put it in the IEP, but then, the speech path has to go to 4 schools and doesn't always make it there. You want to keep track of that because they owe you everything that's in the IEP. And if they had that you got 1,266 minutes of speech and you only got 800, then they have to pay for you to get speech during the summer. Oopsie, hold them accountable for that. Same thing with OT and adaptive physical education. Make a decision about what's right for your child for all of these things if you want the push in or the pull out. And it might change. In the beginning, you might need the OT to be a pull out, that they get pulled out of the classroom and go to the OT room, because it's also functioning as a break where they get to run around and get their yayas out and do all that stuff. But then later down the road, when your child is a little bit older, you might think to yourself, now wait a second, they're missing what's happening in the classroom while they're gone, and what they're struggling with now is sitting up to do the handwriting. So now you ask for the OT to do a push in, where they come into the classroom and they got the ball for your child is sitting on the ball, and they help, teach the child how to regulate to be on the ball while sitting up and doing the handwriting. So that would be the difference between those two things. I can't know for you for your child, but I have a feeling that you have a sense already. And if you're really like, I don't though, Shannon, I really, really don't, find the person on the team that you trust the most. It might be the teacher that you trust the most, and say, what are you seeing? Like, when he goes out to these things, is he missing a lot? Like, is it frustrating for you that he's not there and you feel like, oh, this is the thing that he really needed to be there for? Or, like, what are the hardest parts of the day for him? What do you think? But whoever it is that you trust, usually there's at least one solid, really good person on your team that you can go to and trust. Anna says OT for our son for son is to train teacher for teacher to do with my son. However, my son has subs since the teacher is on leave. What can we request to cover this for him to have his OT when the teachers are not there? Ask for an OT push-in. And because a lot of times when your child is, gets to a certain age, what they will do is they'll say, well, we don't think that your child needs direct OT intervention anymore. We're going to make it a consultation, that now the OT and the teacher meet outside of instruction time, and the OT gives things to the teacher to do in the classroom with the OT. It's great, very effective if you're at that point. But if the teacher is all subs because the teacher is out, then it all falls down the waste barrel, right? But what I would immediately go back and do is say, we have consultation here, but there's no one to consult with because it's subs. So we would like to change this to an OT push-in, where the OT will go push in. If it was the consultation was once a week for 30 minutes, now we want the OT to push in once a week for 30 minutes where they can be directly instructing my student on what to do, and the sub can be observing. And hopefully that will help. But that's, it's miserable when the teacher isn't there, when things are built into the IEP but I trust you, Anna, that you're on top of it. First teacher quit since she took another job closer to home. Subs for a month, and a new teacher was great, but now on leave, so we have subs again. So OT has not been done since the teachers are sub. Yeah. It's a very common tale, Anna, and I'm very sorry that that's what's happening, but I would for sure, you can either ask for an emergency IEP meeting, or you can say, hey, I know, this is how I would do it. I would say, hey, here's what's happening. Normally I would ask for emergency IEP meeting, but I know we're all strapped for time. If we need to have a meeting to do this, I'm happy to do this, but I also would be willing to not have the meeting and just have you change this to a push-in. And that might be enough for them to go, oh yeah, because we have the meeting, she's going to end up getting it anyway, and then you might get it faster. You know what I'm saying? That's how I would play it, but up to you. But I definitely think you definitely need to call them on it. And if they don't immediately change it, even if they immediately change it, you might go back to them during your next IEP meeting and say, hey, we're out of compliance on, and that's the phrase, you guys. Whenever they're not doing something in the IEP and you want to get serious business with them, you say, we're out of compliance on this on the IEP, and we really need to address this. And because they need to give you back that consultation, and if they can't, then they need to give you OT over the summer. And you may not want to do OT over the summer, you may have other things, but the fact remains that they would owe it to you. So that's up to you. So the other things on the list, a lot of people will not want to do adaptive physical education because it means that your child is not going to gym with the other kids. Some people love that. We had my son doing both, that he would have gym with the other kids, but then he would go, we asked for APE in the hours before school. So he would get there a half an hour before school and had this really great APE that would play all these games with him and a couple of other friends whose parents dropped them off early that were about dexterity and things like that set him up for success in PE. I was a big fan of saying to people, they will tell you that all these services have to be delivered during school hours. Ask for their handbook to see what school hours are, because what they'll try to tell you is it's during school instruction hours. And I didn't want my son being taken out of math class to go to APE. I didn't want that. But I still wanted him to have the APE. So we found the loophole in their thing that school hours were from a half an hour before school to an hour after school. And so we would get some of our services then. They hated me for it. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy that they hated me for it. You know what I'm saying? Because it helped my son. You also can ask for tutoring. If your child needs tutoring, most schools have something that's called RSP or something like that, resource, where your child can get tutoring. And if they don't, ask them about it, because a lot of times there's a free tutoring program, and that's another classroom that they can go to take their tests or help with tests or assignments. it's definitely, it's a thing. Now, it isn't always the best thing, like find out what your resource program is and who's running it and how they are. There was one person who ran one of our resource that she would always talk to the students like this. And it would just like be nails on a chalkboard for all the parents and all the kids. Nobody ever wanted to go to her classroom. It's like, what are you doing? Can you just have a conversation with somebody? But, so know who you're dealing with. But also decide whether you want the pull outs or the push in. There are good reasons for both, and they're individualized. So know what you want for yourself. Ask for those sensory considerations. If your child needs something to hold or a fidget, or they need a surface on their desk, or the chair needs to be a certain thing, whatever it is, put it in there that your child needs that, and or just have it be in there that we reserve the right to ask for sensory materials that will change, because maybe he'll do 6 weeks with a fidget, but then he needs something else, so you don't have to go back and legislate it each and every time. Number 9, those personalized instruction aids. Boy, the list is so long with this. And if you've ever dealt with a good OT, even good SLPs, a lot of times they'll make a recommendation for something like, even the ball is considered an instructional aid, but they have all these fabulous things. You can even look on Pinterest and put in personalized instruction aids and see things that they have that help students to be able to focus, help them to be able to regulate, help them to be able to get back to the work or hold the pencil or whatever. And you can request these as well. But the last one, and we talked about this at length, is the behavior intervention plan. Here's what happens if you don't have the behavior intervention plan. It's a recipe for disaster, because you've been fighting for your child to be in a setting with certain accommodations, right? For what's appropriate. So let's say that you fought and little Mildred is in 2nd grade and you wanted her to be in a hybrid class, because eventually you want her, by the time she goes to junior high, you want her to be fully included. That's your hope, your dream, right? And you fought for her and you got that with a one-on-one aid. But now Mildred is spitting. And during a test, she spits, and we're in the land of COVID, right? And so the school starts to freak out about this, and they're like, she can't be in this classroom if she's going to spit. And they're not wrong. But if we don't have a behavior intervention plan, what's going to happen is that they're going to move Mildred to another classroom, and you're going to lose everything that you fought so hard for. They might move her to a special day classroom, and they might say, oh, she doesn't need the aid anymore because we have 2 teachers' assistants in there, and now you lost all this ground, right? If you say, we got a new behavior, let's do a behavior intervention plan, then Mildred has a fighting chance to stay in that classroom and overcome whatever it was that was causing her to spit. And it might be that, she's got a cavity and she's drooling, and we need to teach her what to do when you drool. Like that you swallow and you have a napkin that you can, we teach her what you do when you drool, not spit, right? Or it might be that she's spitting because somebody is poking her with a pencil, and we can address that, right? What often happens when we don't have a behavior intervention plan is either that the setting gets moved in an unfair way, in my opinion, or that somebody tries to put a consequence strategy in place that makes absolutely no sense for someone who is in a classroom ever, but also someone who is struggling with communication deficits. And we want to keep our students safe, and we want to keep them on track. And that's what behavior intervention plans do. A well-done behavior intervention plan starts with a functional behavior assessment, looks at what was the need for the behavior, and it addresses that. It helps them find a way to fulfill that need that is in a way that does not disrupt the classroom and endanger anybody, right? It seeks to make it so that that behavior is no longer going to be necessary because it's being met in another way. And if we do have to have consequence strategies, that they are fair and reasonable and keep our students safe along with all the other students and the staff as well. So behavior intervention plan, key. Yama, I'm so glad that you're here with us. So anyway, and we went way over. But does anybody have any questions about this? There are a whole bunch of other considerations, and I feel like we could talk about this for 6 hours. But hopefully that helps you to know some of the things that you can ask for. I can't believe I didn't include on that long list of different things that, because the one thing that I really didn't address here is what happens to your child during breaks, lunches and recess or study halls, right? And when you're asking for an aid, a lot of times, if you think about this logically, if you get them to capitulate to the aid and they'll go, okay, well, we have the aid, but the aid has to take a break. And a lot of times they'll say, well, we'll put an aid in during instructional time. Oh, schools love to do that. Well, so the aid will, and it'll appear on the service page, aid to be with the student during instructional time. So what happens to the student when they go to lunch? What happens to the student when they go to recess? These are key times where socialization is in place that's going to affect how your child feels about school. Do they have friends? Are they being bullied? Do they have a way to connect with those students and communicate in a way that makes them happy? We have those breaks in place for people to take a break. Is your child getting to take a break, or is it a sensory nightmare where they're not regulated and that other people make fun of them? We don't want that. So make sure that if your child requires an aid, that you are asking for it to be end-to-end, that somebody meets them there to check them in school and hands them off to you at the end, and that they're covered the whole time. An easy way around this is to get a recreational aide who is with them during resource time, and you can request that along, and they'll do a recreational assessment. They'll drag it out to the end of the year, Anna, right? But you don't have to let them do that. There is I don't know what the exact legal timeline is, even here in California. I think it's 45 days that they have from the time that they say they're going to do an assessment until when they have to give you the results. But I wouldn't testify to that in court, Anna, but there is a timeline. I would just tell them that they're past it, because it's almost April and you asked for it in January. They're past it. Whatever it is, they're past it. And they're running the clock down. And they'll say, oh, we thought you wouldn't want to do it before the end of the year. Yeah, poppycock. I have other words for that. Jean, I'm so glad that you were here too. Thank you everybody for being here. Just remember to fight for what you think is right. 9 times out of 10, the law is on your side, but you don't have to get so emotional about fighting for it, because that's the worry, right? We can stand up for our kids, but we don't have to have it eat our stomach lining, because I think you're going to be successful in the end. When you push this and push, the school will capitulate because they know the law too. Their lawyers will tell them, just give it to them. Just give it to them. And if you're clear with what you want, oh, it's so much easier for them to give you what you want. So be clear, have it be something that's appropriate, explain to them why it's appropriate. And if you have any questions about any of it, or there's something specific like, an argument, write to me, send me an email, shannon@autism-live.com. I love to be helpful in this arena, because it makes all the years that I went through it and cried worth it. Because if I can help you to get to someplace without having to cry, then I go, all right, it was worth it then. That and the fact that my kid is doing so well. Hey, I just love and respect, okay, Anna, the name of the app. All right, talk amongst yourselves. Let me get in here and see, because it shouldn't be that far down. Sorry, I'm scrolling. And I do not see it. I wonder if she emailed it to me. I think that it's Teach to Talk, but I am not seeing it. I switched over to Sue. I know, isn't this scintillating programming? Watching me look at my phone. Touch Chat HD. There it is. So Touch Chat HD. This is the one that Sue Cho recommends. Touch Chat HD. I'm so glad that we got that. Yes. Anna says, I will because I want to cry. Oh, I'm so sorry, Anna. I don't want you to cry. Um, Here's the thing. This stuff happens. You are amazing. You are in there fighting for your kiddo every day, and you're here to get more information. He is so lucky to have you. He is so lucky to have you. And none of us got the whole thing, on the first day exactly how it should be. Do I still kick myself about that 1 year with that one teacher? Yes, I do. But then I remind myself, I wouldn't want you to kick yourself about it, right? Do you want me to kick myself about that teacher? Or would you say something to me like, well, you did the best you could on the day you did, right? And I want to say that back to you. Girl, you're getting it done. And yeah, they're going to try to pull fast ones all the time, but you're there. You're asking the questions. And, sometimes they're going to get away with these little infraction things, but it's not because you weren't on the job. It's because they're buttheads and they're trying to save money, which massively hurts my feelings. And it should hurt your feelings too. But you're doing a wonderful job. You're doing an amazing job. And you are going to get that one-on-one aid. It's going to happen. And I can't wait. I love it when parents write to me later on. They're like, I got the aid. It took forever, but I got the aid. You will get the aid and things. I tell you something, just being a parent who shows up and asks questions and says, but wait, we need this, do this assessment. You're making it better for your kid every single day. And not only that, you're making it better not only for your kid, but for every kid who comes after him. So I'm sending you a hug. Absolutely. You're doing a good job. And Jean says, if needed, get a patient advocate for your child. Yeah, if there are medical necessities for your child, that's a whole arena we didn't even touch on. Sometimes people have a medical one-to-one aid. Like if your child is on a respirator or needs help in the bathroom because, the equipment works in a different way, whatever that is, if they need medical assistance, you betcha. You fight tooth and nail for that because they have to provide that. And a medical aid is different than an instructional aid, and who's also different from a behavioral aid. But schools kind of lump them all together. But if you need to, yes, get a patient advocate and get an educational advocate and a lawyer and all of those wonderful things. But if you need me to look at something, happy to look at something, but I'm none of those things. But Yama says, every time my son IEP was coming up, I will review all recommendations for your show. It helps me so much. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much for being here. All right, you guys, I've said goodbye a bunch of times now. I'm really going to say it. We are going to be back. We've got programming for you on tomorrow and Friday, but we're back live on Monday. And we're really going to be taking on the whole podcast-a-thon. I'm going to make some announcements on Monday of some really important hours. You guys are going to love it. Excited to be able to do that because we're heating up, getting ready for that. Big fingers all crossed. Think a good thought for us because we're trying to do something good. We're trying to provide some information, and there are so many little sticky wicket things. So keep us in your... Jean says, we're fighting for a one-on-one aid. You go, Jean, make it happen. And you can. It's just that if everybody did it, the school wouldn't have any other money, and so they're going to push back. But, if you push in the right ways and tell them why it's appropriate, you're going to get that aid. It's going to happen. All right, much love. I'll see you again live here on Monday. Until then, give your kiddos a hug for me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.